Welcome to Listen Up, the Buescher Bible Podcast. I'm Samuel. Today is September 14th, and we are in Proverbs 14. This is a chapter that has a lot of verses I like, so I'm going to try to go through these pretty quick. Some of these concepts we've covered, like I've said before. Proverbs covers a lot of the same concepts, but just presents them in different ways. So I'm going to try to go light on some of those topics and hit some of these other points that we haven't really covered before. That being said, let's jump right in. So Proverbs 14 verse 1 says, "The wise woman builds her house, but the foolish pulls it down with her hands." And this is, I don't think, a gender-specific proverb, because the same is true of a wise husband builds his house, but the foolish pulls it down with his hands. It's interchangeable. And there's multiple ways that you can pull down your own house. A lot of them have to do with a lack of self-control, not having appropriate boundaries and being able to maintain those things. And so the first one that comes into my mind is finances. There's a lot that you can do to destroy the future of your family by not managing your finances well. So that's just one example. Another example would be, how you cherish your spouse's wife. If you are demeaning to your spouse, if you're not encouraging, if you aren't loving, if you aren't seeking to build that relationship week by week and month by month, then very likely you could end up pulling down your own house. And this is one of those things that we often don't realize, that we're destroying ourselves with seeking our own pleasure or our own vindication. When you are married, it's no longer I, it's a we thing. And so everything that you do affects we, not just me. And the more that we understand that and live that, the healthier and stronger our marriage and our house will be. Proverbs verse 2 says, "He who walks in his uprightness fears the Lord, but he who is perverse in his ways despises him." So again, there's no neutral actions. There's a lot of things that are neutral. For example, technology. Is technology good or is technology evil? It's a neutral thing. It depends on how you use it, whether or not you're using it for good or for bad. And money is another one of those things. You can use it for good. You can use it for bad. It's neutral in and of itself. But when we are perverse in our ways, there is no neutrality towards God. So if we're upright in our ways, we're walking in the fear of the Lord. If we're perverse in our ways, we are despising the Lord. And we can think, doesn't bother anybody, doesn't hurt anybody, but it is spitting in the face of God, essentially. And there are people that just sin because they want to spit in God's face. And here's the thing about that, is that God's heart is broken over those things. He is sad about that kind of stuff happening, but he's also outside of time. And so while what we do affects him, it does not hurt him, and it does not change who he is. It won't change his actions towards us. And at the same time, there is going to be judgment for those things. So we might think that we're hurting God with those things, but we're really only hurting ourselves and ultimately walking in a path that leads to our own destruction. So don't do it. Fear the Lord and know that what you do really does matter to him. I think verse 4 is a really key verse. It's actually quoted in the New Testament, and it's, one that's similar to it is quoted in the New Testament, but I think that it has a really good principle here. So verse 4 says, "Where no oxen are, the trough is clean, but much increase comes by the strength of an ox." So where this is quoted in Scripture is there's this phrase, "Don't muzzle the ox while it treads out the grain." And that's a verse that Jesus quoted. It's also a verse that the apostles quoted. And basically, there's supposed to be this generosity towards your animals because they're producing more for you than you would be able to produce by yourself. And how that works in the church is that a laborer is worthy of his wages. So if somebody is doing something that's productive for the church, even if it doesn't have like a monetary gain necessarily, that person should be honored in a monetary way. And so here it says, where no oxen are, the trough is clean, but much increase comes by the strength of an ox. And essentially what it's saying, well, there's a lot of things that you could draw out of this, but one of the things that I want to point out is that there is this reality of life is messy. When you have employees or when you are involved with other people, it's going to bring a mess into the situation, and you're going to have to give of yourself. You're going to have to provide for those people. You're going to have to be friendly. You're going to have to be loving. You're going to have to sit there and empathize with them and their weakness. But without them, you wouldn't get the same increase that you get. And so it's always a net benefit in your life to have other people around you. Or in this example, it's a net benefit in your life to have helpers, oxen. Verses 6, 7, and 8 all go together. It says, a scoffer seeks wisdom and does not find it, but knowledge is easy to him who understands. Go from the presence of a foolish man when you do not perceive in him the lips of knowledge. The wisdom of the prudent is to understand his way, but the folly of fools is deceit. So the two concepts that I want to focus on out of this verse are where it says, or these verses are when it says, when you do not perceive in him the lips of knowledge. So you're supposed to go from the presence of a foolish man when you do not perceive in him the lips of knowledge. This is a concept that we've covered before, but I always think that this is a really important concept because we base a lot of our self-worth off of other people's opinions of us, but we don't always have a good valuation of whose opinions should matter to us. So there is this reality of a person who is foolish isn't like, so what if they don't like you? So what if they don't care about you? So what if they're not your friend? That's not a person that's going to be edifying in your life. So it's better for you to just walk away from that relationship. And then the wisdom of the prudent is to understand his way, but the folly of fools is deceit. And again, this is a concept that's really a major concept of wisdom in general. But wisdom is to be able to look ahead and see what the end result of it is. So in this context, what it's saying is, there's all of these people around you who are foolish or following folly, and the wise thing to do is to walk away from those relationships from a standpoint of, like, they're not going to be your inner circle close friends. It's still important to share the gospel with every single person, and you have to interact with people regardless of whether or not they're walking with the Lord or not. But your friends are not supposed to be these people, because you should look ahead to where you're going to be in the next 5 years if those people remain and continue to be your close friends. So it's better to walk away. It's better to perceive where this route is going. And so, like I've said before, who do you want to be in 10 years? Who do you want to be in 20 years? Those are the people that should be your mentors. Who are the people that you would like to be like today? Those should be your friends. Your friends should be people that love the Lord and that are edifying and inspiring in your life. And the only way to have those friends is to be involved with the church and find them. Verse 10 says, the heart knows its own bitterness, and a stranger does not share its joy. So there's another verse in this chapter that also talks about grief. And grief is a really complex subject. There's 5 different general stages of grief. There's anger and depression and avoidance and bargaining, and then finally acceptance. And what's hard about that is that there's aspects of grieving that really need to be experienced in the context of community in order for healing to happen. But there is this dichotomy, there is this challenge where the heart knows its own bitterness. It's really difficult for somebody to actually enter into your grief and be able to perfectly relate to what you're going through. There's general situations like loss or disappointment or rejection that all of us experience. And so we can empathize with each other in those points, because it's like, oh, you've had a loss, I've had a loss. You've had a disappointment, I've had a disappointment. You've been rejected, I've been rejected too. And so we can empathize with each other. But the specific situations can be something that, gets really tough to find somebody that has specifically gone through that same thing and is able to fellowship with you on those things. So for some people, that could be things where it's like the death of a child. I don't know a ton of people that have experienced the death of a child. I do know a couple of people, but I don't know a ton of people. And there's a difference too between a young child and an adult child. And so there's a deep level of grief on that in some ways those people just feel alone until they can find somebody that's had that very same experience and share that grief. So we need to recognize that and help people with that, because, it's important to have compassion. Heaping guilt on somebody that's in the midst of grieving is not going to help them heal in that grief process. And when we recognize that, this is not a grief that I'm able to fully empathize with you on, I can't fully relate with you on this thing, sometimes it's better to just sit with the person. I really love Job and his 3 friends. So Job goes through this crazy loss that almost nobody has ever experienced before. And his friends start out the situation really, really well. They come and they sit with him and they basically say nothing for a whole week. They just mourn with Job. And then Job starts talking and they start talking, and then it just devolves into this argument because Job is like, what's the point of living? And his friends are like, well, if you weren't such a crappy guy, this wouldn't have happened to you. And then it all devolves from there. And the Lord has to come in the end and clear things up. But with mourning, sometimes the best thing to do is to actually just sit with somebody and say nothing. Just be there with them, or just listen to them and let them tell their story. And there's also this concept of a stranger does not share its joy. So the closer our friends are, the more that they're able to share our joy and our sorrow, because they are bound together with us. And the further and further somebody is out from our circle, the harder it is for them to share our joy and our sorrow. And so there can be this expectation of, shouldn't you be rejoicing with me? And somebody's just like, I don't get it. I'm sorry. So hearts are a tricky thing. I'm going to skip one of the verses that I was going to talk about, and I'm going to go to this other verse that talks about grief. Verse 13 says, even in laughter the heart may sorrow, and the end of mirth may be grief. So when somebody's going through deep sorrow, or even when they're going through a crisis, like a thought crisis or a belief crisis, you can do a lot to encourage that person, but they may just end up circling back into the place that they were. And that's okay. It's part of the process of grief and growing. So what we need to realize is that when people are grieving things, like I said before, there's kind of those 5 general stages of grief. There's other stages as well, but those are kind of the big 5, generally speaking. People experience different stages of grief in different orders and to different degrees. And so, they may be angry and struggling with anger in the midst of their grief. And you come in and you're really encouraging and you do a great job. And then they just cycle back into that anger. That is pretty typical and pretty normal. And we shouldn't be frustrated with somebody that's in that point of grief, that's going through that thing. Same with depression, same with avoidance, same with bargaining. And so it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of compassion to help somebody mourn and grieve well and move past their grief into acceptance. And even in the stage of acceptance, there can be times that you still experience sorrow. The difference is that you're usually, when you're in the grieving process, you're usually asking the question of why did this happen? And when you're in the stage of acceptance, when you feel that pain again, it's more of a, why did this happen? Yes, that's right. That's why it happened. There's like an understanding. And it's just something that you can grieve and then move past without it knotting up your heart and really tangling you up for a long period of time again. So grief is complicated, it's tough, and it's something that we need to walk through with wisdom. Verse 12 says, "There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death." Oh, such a strong principle in Proverbs. Another aspect of this is pride, right? So the person that is lifted up in pride, their path ends with death. Another way is a fool, or all of these other things. But basically, there's a way that seems right to us, but it may actually lead to our destruction. And just because our heart says go that way is not a strong indicator that that's the thing that we should be doing, or the thing that we should be saying, or the thing that we should be investing in or partaking in. Instead, we need to be checking ourselves against the Word of God, prayer, counsel, and then typically we end up going in a way that's right and leads to life. So be really careful. Understand that just because something seems good to you, it might actually be a trap that's leading to your destruction. And so having a humble heart is one of the keys to wisdom and to success in life. I think verse 14 is interesting, and I'm just going to touch on this concept. I'm not going to really expand on the verse very much. It says, "The backslider in heart will be filled with his own ways, but a good man will be satisfied from above." So I want to think about this word backslider. There is truth that we regress. And if we're not advancing, we are typically regressing. We can stall out sometimes and then start regressing. Or we can stall out sometimes and then pick back up and keep heading upwards into wisdom and into a deeper relationship with the Lord. But there is this reality of not investing in your relationship with the Lord leads to backsliding. And so you are becoming less than you were the day before. And I think that that's a scary thought, and it's a good warning for us not to be lazy, but to be diligent in our relationship with the Lord and in our walk with wisdom. Verse 15 says, "The simple believes every word, but the prudent considers well his steps." And this, like I have said, and will continue to say throughout Proverbs, there's several categories of people. And one of those categories is the simple person. The simple person's not a stupid person, they're just an untaught person. And one of the signs of simplicity is that you're kind of gullible. You just believe what other people say and you go along with it. You don't really investigate and try to figure out what somebody's motives are behind telling you the things that they tell you and what the ultimate outcome of those decisions is going to be. But that is the sign of prudence, is that you're looking underneath the surface and you're asking yourself, is this a person that really cares about me? Or is this somebody that is just trying to use me to fulfill their agenda? And is this an outcome that I'm going to be thankful I had at the end, or is this something that's going to end up leading to my harm? And the more that we can think through those things, the more that we have applied wisdom in our lives. Verse 20 and 21 say, "The poor man is hated even by his own neighbor, but the rich has many friends." And we talked about this before, this concept of there is a reality that injustice does limit the poor person's ability to get ahead in life. And that is part of the reason why we need to have compassion on our neighbors and not just say well, it's their fault, they're lazy, that's the reason that they're stuck in this place. There are people that are legitimately stuck because they have no one to help them and they have nobody to pull them up and draw them up, which is one of the things that I do appreciate about the liberal position, is that it's typically a position where it tries to seek out the person that's downcast and pull them up rather than just telling them that they have every opportunity and they should step up. I think it really takes both things in order to be able to get a person into a place of thriving. But if a person is oppressed and despised by their neighbors, their ability to succeed is dramatically hampered. And it takes a really intense personality type to be able to dig themselves out of that point. So here's the contrast to that, right? In 21, it says, "He who despises his neighbor sins, but he who has mercy on the poor, happy is he." The typical human tendency is to despise the poor and try to be friends with the rich. It's essentially this attitude of like, I'm going to be friends with those who can help me. If I'm going to help somebody, they should be able to help me in return. I'm not going to be friends with somebody that can't do anything for my social game or for my financial game or for my, whatever other games there are. There's so many different games. But filtering out people and just saying like, no, I'm not going to have compassion on them. I'm not going to care about them because they can't do anything for me actually is a sinful attitude to have towards our fellow men and women. Instead, we should have mercy on the poor. We should have mercy on the least of these because that actually leads us to a place of blessing or happiness. And happiness is something that we are seriously lacking in our society. And it's largely because of these kinds of attitudes and this love of money and a lot of and lack of relationship, disrespect for parents, a lot of these fundamental things that humans have understood for all of human existence, we seem to be throwing off and rejecting, and it is leading to a devastating loss of our happiness or blessedness. Verse 22 says, "Do they not go astray who devise evil, but mercy and truth belong to those who devise good." So moral bankruptcy comes at a price. And there's this teaching about sin that we don't often focus on or think about. But one of the fruits of sin is that it actually hampers your ability to think and reason well. And Scripture talks about it in Romans and in other places. And there's this concept that when we reject God, God gives us over to a debased mind, to a depraved mind. And so our thinking becomes corrupt. So the person who devises evil is somebody who goes astray. But on the contrast, the person who walks in mercy and truth, they are somebody that is growing not only in wisdom, but their ability and capacity to hold and to act in good. So moral bankruptcy has a price. And this is why this should be one of our filters for friends, for our close friends, right? Not for our acquaintances and the people that we reach out to with the gospel, but the people that are in our circle. Are the people that are walking in moral integrity, because those are the people that are going to be the most beneficial to us in our lives. 23 says, "In all labor there is profit, but idle chatter leads only to poverty." So it doesn't matter what it is, be diligent in your work. Well, there's always a qualifier. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's something that's not inherently sinful, be diligent in your work and you will have profit from it. And there is work that is more valuable and less valuable in a monetary sense. But all work has its own glory and it has a benefit. So if you aren't satisfied with the amount of income that you're making at a particular job, it could be because you're not asking your bosses, like, how do I become so valuable to you that you would give me a real raise in my position? Or because there's just a lack of diligence in your hands, and so your bosses are like, I don't really want to give that person a raise. Or it could be because you need to improve your skills so that you can work at a higher paying position somewhere. So be diligent because you will get a reward from it. But if all you do is talk and complain and, shoot the breeze about all the things that you do with money and complain about why you don't have enough money and all of these other sorts of things, then you're just going to stay in a place of poverty. Verse 25 says, "A true witness delivers souls, but a deceitful witness speaks lies." So you literally save people's lives by telling the truth. 26 says, "In the fear of the Lord there is strong confidence, and his children will have a place of refuge. The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life to turn one away from the snares of death." Just more reasons why the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Its fruit is so good, does so much for you, it protects you, gives you confidence when you're walking in the fear of the Lord. Verse 28 says, "In a multitude of people is a king's honor, but in the lack of people is the downfall of a prince." This is a concept that we haven't touched on much in Proverbs, but I think it's an important concept just from a nation standpoint, but also from a community standpoint. There is this reality that many hands make light work, right? And so if we're in a community that is rich in creativity and people that are willing to work, then it's going to build up our nation, and it makes it much more possible for the people that are in authority to over us to actually walk in their authority well and to live in that place well. So I think often about the police, they have a super tough job. And as the community gets more and more lawless, their job gets harder and harder. And so having a multitude of people that are walking in honor brings the king honor, and it makes their life better. But when there's a lack of people of honor, then it actually brings a downfall to a country or to a nation. And there's this reality too of in this day, like the size of your kingdom reflected the strength of your kingdom. And so a kingdom that was small because it was mismanaged or poorly led or it had poor values is vulnerable to attack, and it's vulnerable to destruction. But a people that's robust and loves life and has lots of kids is a people that is strong and enduring. Verse 29 says, "He who is slow to wrath has great understanding, but he who is impulsive exalts folly." I think this is such an important principle in the information age, where we can get information almost instantaneously. Like we find out something happened and then you can pull up 20 articles about what's happening, right? But often the truth of a situation doesn't come to light until at least a week after its initial reporting. So if we're jumping to conclusions and we're forming opinions and we're fighting with people over something that we literally learned about like 60 minutes ago, we are going to be walking in folly. So we want to be slow to wrath, and we want to be quick to seek our understanding, right? And so hold your tongue, hold your horses, wait for a situation to develop, figure out what actually happened before you voice your opinion on it, so that when you speak, you're speaking righteousness instead of just speaking impulsiveness. Verse 30 says, "A sound heart is life to the body." Well, let me go back to that. Because what we want to be is we want to be people who are a blessing to our friends and family. And when we're jumping to conclusions so fast, we can actually burn relationships over things that aren't true. So yeah, be slow to speak. Okay, verse 30. "A sound heart is life to the body, but envy is rottenness to the bones." So if you're content, it actually makes you healthier. And if you are in a place of envy, it actually hurts your physical body. And there's a lot to be said about this in the realm of stress, for one. So stress, the more stress we're under, the more damage that our bodies endure, like on a day-by-day, hour-by-hour basis. But when we're in a place of peace, it actually has a net benefit on our health and our longevity. So that's just one example physiologically of how that principle actually works itself out in real life. Verse 31 says, "He who oppresses the poor reproaches his maker, but he who honors him has mercy on the needy." So this chapter has dealt with the poor several times, and it's kind of been this cascading, like, it's easy to despise the person that can't give us any benefit, but we should do it because the Lord honors those who does that, and because there's great honor for that person in and of itself, and there's a blessing there. Now it gets into this, like, God made all of us. So when we despise God, or despise anybody, we're despising the Lord, because we as humans are image bearers of God. Verse 32 says, "The wicked is banished in his wickedness, but the righteous has a refuge in his death." So I think this is one of these verses that's talking about eternity. And, if we never receive Christ, then we're going to be banished into utter darkness, where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, and where the fire is never quenched and the worm never dies. And it's going to be pretty bad. Like, there's no way to get around the fact that eternal torment is bad. But the righteous has a refuge in his death. So if we're walking with the Lord and we love the Lord, when we die, we know that we have a home in heaven. Last verse for this chapter that we're going to talk about, verse 34. "Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people." So how we walk as a nation has a collective net benefit on everybody in that people. And the more that we walk in righteousness, the more that it is a glory to us. It's so fascinating to me. You can track and just see through history, every nation that kills its children dies out. The Spartans are an example of that. The Spartans would kill off babies that were deemed physically deficient. And so birth defects, they just throw those kids away, literally throw them away. And kids that just didn't look strong enough, they'd throw them away. And the Spartans went from being a regional powerhouse to basically an inconsequential people that essentially disappeared, while the Athenians, who didn't do that with their kids, ended up rising to dominance over the Spartans and ruling much of the Grecian area until the Macedonians came through and took control of Greece. But that's like one example. The Carthaginians are another example of people who sacrificed their kids to demons, and they suffered and were destroyed for it. There's a lot of people in the land of Canaan that did that, and the Israelites wiped them out. So there is no culture in known history that has committed infanticide that has survived. And it's one of the reasons why I think the abortion versus pro-life debate is actually incredibly important, because any society that starts to move into that place of despising its children and seeing its children as a burden, something that should be sacrificed on the altar of success, is a culture that is dying and going to be destroyed. And there is no room in the Bible for abortion. There's just none. It is killing an innocent child, and the Lord always judges that. I think it's one of the reasons that our country is in the state that it is, because of all of the blood that's on our hands. We are moving less and less into a place of unity and brotherly love all the time, and more into a place of violence and destruction, because you can't get away with murder. And as a people, we've tried to get away with murder for a long, long time. But the Lord is judging and will judge that. There's always room for repentance, and I pray that we do repent. But if our nation doesn't turn back to righteousness, then we are going to be given over to shame and destruction. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. So on that super happy, positive note, remember that the choices that we make affect ourselves, but not just ourselves. They affect our whole communities as well. And so we want to be people who walk in wisdom, because we don't want just to build ourselves up, but we want to build up the people that are around us too. Have a great night. I'll see you guys tomorrow.